Hi, li, li. Hi, li, li. Ni, ni. Ni, ni. Okay, so the name of the Parsha is Metzorah. So what is that? The word Metzorah refers to a person afflicted by tzara'at. Well, okay, but what's tzara'at? It is a scaly affliction of the skin, which places them in a state of being ritually unfit to make offerings. This is not something that there's any kind of tradition around existing anymore. This is something that existed in the narrative of the Torah, but it's not something we deal with today, just to be clear about that. This is our pasuk. We'll be looking at this verse comes in the midst of the description of the purification of the Metzorah, someone who has this skin affliction called tzara'at. It says, V'lakach hakohen midam ha'asham. The priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering. V'natan hakohen al tenuch ozen hamitaher ha'imanit. And the priest shall put it on the ridge of the right ear of the one who is being cleansed, and on the thumb of their right hand. Ba'al bohen yado hayamanit. Ba'al bohen raglo hayamanit. And on the big toe of his right foot. There is a story that Reb Zusha was once with his master, Reb Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, when a man came into the room and started aggressively nagging the Maggid for a blessing on his business. Now, Reb Zusha had special powers and could perceive all the past deeds of a person simply by looking at them. When he looked at this man begging for a blessing, he could see this guy had done many awful things. In an instant, Reb Zusha lost his temper and snapped at the man. "How dare you ask the great Maggid to help you with your business? You should be asking him how you can atone for the things you've done." The man turned red with embarrassment and left in a hurry. Reb Zusha suddenly realized what he had done, that he had shamed this man, and he didn't know what to do. The Maggid placed his hands upon Reb Zusha and gave him a blessing that from that point onward, he should only see the good in other people. But since the Maggid didn't have the power to take away Zusha's ability to perceive one's past deeds, from that point onward, Zusha perceived the sins of others within himself. So what is the meaning of this story? Is Reb Zusha beating himself up for other people's faults? When we feel deeply triggered by another person's perceived faults, it is usually because the same fault exists or used to exist within ourselves. I know that's true with my own children. Oi, I wish they wouldn't do what I used to do. But that's often how it is. That which we react to out there is also often in here. There's a hint in our cryptic opening pasuk. V'natan hakohen al tenuch ozen, and the priest shall put it on the ridge of his right ear. The ozen, the ear, represents our mental understanding of what's going on in the world, since it is through the ear that we hear the reports of others. That which we hear stimulates thought, creating a mental image of the world, a worldview. Then we tend to identify with that view, creating the separate self-sense known as ego. So our sense of self, that ordinary, creaturely, separate person self-sense called ego, arises through identification with the image of what's going on in our mind, with our point of view. The ego, in turn, sees the perceived faults of others as out there only. The ego doesn't like to see faults within itself, and so we project, and we create mental narratives of judgment and blame. But we can turn this around when we instead listen to our own thoughts rather than think them. In other words, we use this ozen, this ear we have, and we turn our attention to perceive our thoughts rather than getting simply absorbed into them. And then we can recognize this is only a thought. It may or may not be true. Then we can stay free from the seductive power of ego and see things in their wholeness. Why is this important? Is it only so we can feel better? The al bohen and on the thumb. The bohen, the thumb, represents our actions, since the thumb is the uniquely human tool for manipulating the world. Once we become free from the unconscious motivations of ego by observing our own thoughts, then we can consciously choose our actions so as to embody this awareness rather than merely react unconsciously. But how do we do this? The al bohen raglo, and on the big toe. So the bohen regel, it literally means the thumb of the foot. We call it the big toe, but in Hebrew it's the thumb of the foot. It represents our sensory awareness, since the feet connect with the earth, grounding us in the world of the senses. So we have the bohen on our hand representing action, and the bohen on our foot representing our sensory awareness. By putting attention into our sensory awareness, into our breathing, let's do it right now. Our sensations, the feeling of the body, sounds and sights, the vibrations in the air, whatever our eyes are receiving. When we do this, we greatly reduce the seductive power of thought and emotion, and thereby stay rooted in the truth of our perception, rather than be seduced by the endless tendrils of mental speculation. This is the opposite of being judgmental toward others, of making up stories in your head about them. As it says in Pirkei Avot 2:5, Al tadin et chavercha ad she tagia limkomo. Do not judge a person until you've reached their place. Of course, we can never reach the place of another, so we should not waste energy being judgmental toward them. But this, of course, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have good judgment. If a person is dangerous, for example, we absolutely need to have the judgment to keep ourselves safe. But how do we differentiate between good judgment and being judgmental? Ad shetagia limkomo, until you've reached their place. There is a hint in the word for place in this verse from Pirkei Avot. Makom is place, but it also means God. God is the place. God is the space within which everything arises. Ad shetagia, until you reach. So let's look at this word for reach. Shetagia. It can also mean touch. So we might retranslate this verse from Pirkei Avot. Do not judge a person until you touch the divine spaciousness. Until you touch that place, that deepest place within yourself, that is your own inner divinity. In other words, get out of the ego before you make the judgment. Of course, we have to have good judgment, but in order to do that, we must first disidentify from ego so that we are not unconsciously motivated towards judgmentalism. Then we can see things in their wholeness and respond with wisdom to bring about a beautiful result rather than add to the chaos. Seeing things not from ego, but from the perspective of free, spacious awareness, so that we can respond with wisdom and bring forth more harmony, peace, and beauty, is represented by the sphira on the tree of life called Tiferet.